Hello, welcome back for the final time to section 3, which is obviously about changing from pain to pleasure. And now we're going to look at the third and final way, and that is change your painful choice. And as we've realized up till now, sometimes we don't know that we've made a painful choice. Sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge that we've made a painful choice. Sometimes we're too scared or reluctant to even do the work to go back inside and see the painful choice we've made so we can change it. It seems so much easier to change circumstances. It seems sometimes easier to change the thoughts we have that come into our brain spontaneously without us even asking. Sometimes it seems easier to change those painful thoughts that arise and choose pleasurable thoughts on the level of me and what's happening around me, on the level of me and my thinking about someone else, even me and my thinking about who I am as an individual person, an individual identity. But to go deeper than that into an identity that's not about being a separate person and seeing what choice we're making there that's painful so that we can change that, undo that, look at that. How do we do that? How do we change our painful choice? So that's what we're going to get into in this final section. And to do that, we need to use everything that happens to us in our lives for a totally different purpose. So we have these three things that we've been looking at: our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. And what we often do with our thoughts, feelings, and actions is that we stay on this level, we stay on this circle, and don't go inside to a deeper level of choice. So if a thought comes up that I'm not good enough, then sometimes what we do with that thought is we want reassurance from someone else that we are good enough, that we try our best, and we make an extra effort at work or in our relationship to get the recognition that we want from someone else so that we feel better. We don't use this thought, I'm not good enough, to return deep inside ourselves and think what is really going on there at the level of choice. And this thought, I'm not good enough, if we follow this back inside our mind, we realize that there's a choice to see ourselves as not good enough, to deserve experiencing the love that we are. Somehow everyone else is good enough to connect to who they truly are, but we're not good enough. We're not really worthy of recognizing who we really are, because deep down we have this thought, this painful thought, that we're not good enough. And of course, the purpose of that painful inner thought, we're not good enough, is to make sure we never experience that we are good enough. It's a defense against experiencing the love that we truly are, because that love that we truly are can sometimes be frightening for us. And so we want then to defend ourselves from it by believing that we're not good enough, when in actual fact we are. And it's really not humbleness to think that we're not good enough, but it's arrogance. We were created to be a loving being, and then we have this thought, this painful thought we want to hold on to, that we're not good enough, that we're not the loving being that we've been created to be. That loving being that can shine a joyful light that reminds people who they are. We're going, oh no, that's not us. We're not good enough. We're not that identity. And so it's a defense. It's an arrogant defense against realizing who we truly are. So if we use that thought that seems to be on the level of the world in relationship to someone else, that we're not good enough, to go back into our mind and see how we're using that thought, and to see that that is painful, to see our identity in that way. So if we have this feeling down here, say the feeling of sadness, and we allow that come up, so what is the sadness about? The sadness might be that we've lost someone close to us who's passed away. The sadness might be that we worked for so long to achieve a certain exam result or a certain recognition and it didn't happen. And maybe the sadness is that you need to move country because of your job. But the sadness, if we use it to go back inside, if we use it for another purpose, to discover the painful choice we made inside, then that is using everything for a different way. And even that in itself is starting to become pleasurable. Once we realize what we need to do with our sadness, then we have some hope. Then we can even experience pleasure using our sadness for a different purpose. Maybe the sadness is because we think that we've lost the innocence of who we truly are. Maybe the sadness is about thinking that we have lost our true home inside ourselves. We think it's sadness because we have to move our location of our house and where we're living, but the sadness isn't about that. The sadness is about thinking that we've lost our true home, lost where we truly belong. And if we can look at that sadness on that level, we can gradually smile at that, gradually see that for what it really is, see where the sadness is truly coming from. And if we really get that glimpse, then we can see that we can change that inner sadness. And somehow even the sadness disappears without having to do any changing, without having to undo it or let it go. All those words, let go, undo, can be kind of complicated, because all that's usually needed is to see the sadness for what it really is, and then it disappears. And what you're left with then is what? It's not more sadness. Somehow we think that once we get in touch with some sadness within our mind, that's just opening the door to a massive amount of sadness, and behind that sadness there's despair, and we're just going to get depressed, and the whole thing is going to snowball into a terrible situation. But maybe what we do and find is that when we look at that sadness for what it truly is about, then it just dissolves. It gently melts inside. So what is left is obviously love. Love and joy and security, inner security and inner knowing comes to replace what we thought was sadness. And so to have that experience, we need to use feelings that we have that come up every day to go back inside and see what's going on in there. And that in itself becomes pleasurable. So looking at actions, we haven't really looked over this course much about actions, but a lot of actions are based on fear. What we need to realize when we're doing actions based on fear, based on trying to avoid guilt, then we're disconnecting to our true self, because we're not using those fear-based actions, that behavior, to find out what's really happening inside. So if I'm making an action so that I don't want to upset you, then if I look at that action and bring it back inside, I'm realizing that I don't want to upset myself. I think there's an angry self inside me that's going to punish me in some way, that even if it's not an angry self, it's an angry creator, it's an angry entity, my source, that's wanting to get its own back because I've done something wrong. So if we just stay at doing actions to avoid feeling guilty without going back inside and saying, well, okay, I'm making some actions in my mind, some choices in my mind to avoid experiencing feeling guilty, and those actions in our mind are choices for even more fear. I'm making these choices based on fear. It's leading to more fear. Maybe I just need to stop for a moment and not do anything. And maybe in that quietness, maybe in not taking action, the guilt and the fear melt away. And I realize there isn't anything to do, because I'm simply love in its totalness. I'm simply love in its totality. I'm simply love without having to do anything to deserve it. But I only will really get to experience again that love that's behind taking action to avoid feeling guilty if I'm quiet enough and go back inside and realize it's not what I want to do anymore. I don't want to run around in this world trying not to upset people, doing things to make people happy so that I feel good when I get the praise. doing things to avoid criticism. I want to stop and not act on fear, and not act and make fearful choices in my mind. Because I realize if I stop, then I see there really isn't anything to be afraid of. And so the love that's there will return to my memory. So I'd like to use one example that actually happened last weekend just to illustrate this in a practical way. And my son was wanting to go downtown to buy some clothes for dressing up things for Halloween. And he left the house about 1:30, and we kind of expected him to be back within the hour because he hadn't had lunch yet. So when it arrived at 4:30 and he still hadn't come back, my wife and we decided to go downtown and start looking for him. So one of us went one direction and the other direction. And so I had a great opportunity during that to look at my thoughts. My thoughts at times were, Yuri's just being really irresponsible. He's got his mobile phone with him and yet he's not responding to it, and he should know better and he should be more responsible. And so these thoughts obviously weren't generating very good feelings, and I was just aware of them. At that moment I just wanted to be aware that he should be more responsible, and later on I was able to take that back inside and see, am I being really responsible for my thinking? Am I being responsible enough to not go off in a different direction and get lost in searching for love, searching for acknowledgement in the world? How responsible am I? How lost am I in my inner journey? And so that was a good reminder of that. And so some of the feelings that were coming up were feelings of anxiety, feelings of even fear that there could be something horrible happened, allowed me later to go inside my mind and realize that at times I think something horrible has really happened in there that I don't want to look at. And so I can use opportunities when I think something horrible is happening out there to realize I think the same thing is happening inside. And the fear I'm feeling allows me to use that fear to go back inside, to heal it and to look at it and to hopefully let it go. And the funny thing about it all was quite funny is that halfway through, I think we were out looking for about half an hour, and then I rang my wife on the mobile phone and she said, well, I haven't found him yet, and I suppose the next thing we need to do, the next action we need to do is ring up the police. I thought, she sounds very calm. And afterwards when I was talking to her, she was totally calm about that. She was thinking, what is the next logical step? It wasn't like we need to ring up the police and I'm really distraught and I'm really upset and sad and anxious and really fearful. My wife was going, that's the next logical step. We need just to ring the police. We had already rang friends and parents and done everything we could think of. So it was funny for me to think, okay, that's interesting that someone can come up with a statement that the next action is to ring the police but not be afraid. And I thought that was a beautiful way of seeing that when we have changed our choice for pain to a choice for pleasure in our mind, we can even be in a situation that's seemingly stressful, and yet we're taking action not based on fear. We're not taking action because we're distraught. We're taking that action from a connection inside. Well, the story ended up being fine because about half an hour later he appeared back at home again, and by that stage we still hadn't rang the police, so it was fine. He had met up with some friends that we didn't know about from a new school he had started, and so he was just playing with them, and his volume on his mobile phone was turned way down, and he just never thought about ringing up, and 3 or 4 hours passed and then he just got tired and came home. So we can use every situation in our lives to be aware of what's going on and go back inside, and then when we do that, maybe our actions are based on a connection to love rather than a connection to fear. So in this section, what I want to emphasize is that using all these things, actions, thoughts, and feelings to get back inside our mind is fun. It's pleasure. It's actually joyful. It's what is going to bring you happiness. And it's not just that the end result of choosing pleasure rather than pain, but the process of going back inside. Once you have a taste of that, once you have an experience of that, which I hope you do have during this training, once you have that experience that it is pleasurable, that it is fun, that it does result in something wonderful, then you'll do it more and more. And the more you're motivated to do it, the more pleasurable it becomes. And I just love that. I just love having a different purpose for everything in my life, because I love that inner adventure and I love going deeper, and just doing that is pleasurable for me.